Welcome to the Thinking Practitioner Podcast,
a podcast where we dig into the fascinating issues, conditions, and quandaries in the massage and manual therapy world today.
I'm Whitney Lowe.
And I'm Tel Luca.
Welcome to the Thinking Practitioner. Hello, this is Whitney Lowe, and welcome to the Thinking Practitioner Podcast. This podcast episode is sponsored by Handspring Publishing. Handspring has become one of the preeminent publishers focused on manual therapy topics, and their catalog reads like a who's who of great pioneers in our field. They also offer a series of webinars called Moved to Learn, and these are free webinars with 45-minute segments featuring their authors, including a recent one from Till that's on that series as well. So head on over to their website at handspringpublishing.com to check those out. And be sure to use the code TTP at checkout for a discount. We thank you again very much, Handspring, for sponsoring the podcast with us. So Whitney Lowe here today. Till is off this week, and I'm joined by my good friend and colleague, Drew Freedman, who's going to join me for some interesting discussions today on a variety of topics associated with dealing some challenges and adversities that we're all sort of facing throughout our field right now. So I want to take just a moment to introduce Drew and let him tell you a little bit about his background experience, who he is. So Drew, tell us a little bit about your background and entrance into the field here.
Sure. Well, first and foremost, I'd like to say thanks for having me on the podcast. I really appreciate it. Obviously, I've known you for a long time, and I've known Till for quite a while, so I miss Till not being here, so maybe we can catch up another time. But I really appreciate having the opportunity to talk to everybody here today.
Yeah, great.
I've been in the bodywork field now since, I mean, technically speaking, I started this in high school, and I'm only 30, so.
Excuse me, error.
All right, so I started this back in 1980 something.
Yeah.
Personal trainer. And then I knew I wanted to go to school for sports medicine and athletic training just due to all my, I was into sports and played lacrosse in college and all that. And so I knew what I wanted to do way back when. Went to University of South Florida to take their athletic training sports medicine program there, where I fell in love with it. I loved being an athletic trainer. It was fantastic. The only thing that I saw after a couple of years was that, you're low man on the totem pole, and I didn't have the free will to do some of the things I wanted to do with my treatment approaches. And, understandably, they have protocols and you have to follow those when you work within that sort of framework. So at the time, this was back in 1994, 93, I decided to start looking into doing some more sports massage. And at the time, my best friend at the time was a neuromuscular therapist who worked with St. John down there in Tampa. That's where I was living, is in Tampa, Florida. And I decided, unfortunately, he suffered a bad accident and passed away. So it was the kind of the impetus I needed to say, okay, what do I want to do with my life? Sort of question. I was 25 years old. So I decided if I wanted to go further, whether it's into physical therapy or chiropractic or massage or whatever it might be, what's the best path? And massage out of all those is obviously the fastest track because schooling was never my specialty. I was never a good student. So I figured, let me just get into massage and see if I like that. And then maybe I hop into chiro or PTs and go from there. But so I ended up going to this Suncoast School of Massage in Tampa, Florida, where I was underwhelmed with the program, we'll say at the time. I think it was when Suncoast was on its last legs at the time. But I was very fortunate to have a sports massage instructor by the name of James Weslowski. I don't know if you've ever heard of James. He's a really nice guy.
I think, he a few people know him in our field. Yeah, I think, yeah.
It rings a bell, doesn't he? Anyway, he travels like a couple of weeks a year just to teach. No, James is one of the harder working guys in massage and has been for 25, 30 years. And I was very, very fortunate to have his sort of energy in my life so early on that inspired me to kind of stick it out with massage school and stay with it. And from there, I recognized, like, okay, listen, if this guy can do what he's doing right now, that's what I want to do. That's the path I want to take. Mm-hmm. And fortunately, I was able to talk to James quite a bit, and he gave me so many different names to start learning from beyond himself, such as yourself. I was started reading your newsletters, which I still have all of your newsletters like in a file box from back in the 90s.
I'm not even sure I have them all. Yeah.
But stuff, so I was able to reach out and read some of your work. I was reading Eric Dalton's work. But for me, I was living in Tampa at the time in the mid 90s, and I had no idea what a mecca Tampa or that part of Florida was for massage therapy educators. So I got to study with George Kasoulis at the Core Institute. I work with Aaron Matties. I work with Mike McGillicuddy. I work with Judith Delaney. I was just every other weekend I was taking a course.
Yeah.
And
I want to ask you about that because I've talked to a couple other people about this sort of phenomenon, and I had a similar type of experience in that I didn't realize what a valuable educational mecca I was in when I was doing my initial training in Atlanta. And the same thing I think happened there for you. But when you get outside of that, like once you left and got outside of that, was that the time at which you realized how valuable that had been for you, or how long did it take?
Absolutely. It was only then. So like I said, this was back in the mid 90s. And then I took my massage and I worked down there. I worked with the pro teams and professional and college teams down there for a couple of years, but I'm from Boston originally. So I decided in 99, I wanted to move back up to Boston to be closer to my family. My oldest brother was having kids at the time, so their families were starting to grow. So I just said, have hands will travel. I can just hop in the car and go. I was fortunate to get a job right away with the Celtics when I first moved up here. And so I was ready to rock and roll, but of course, like anything else in life, that fell through before I even started. But I was here. And then I was like, all right, so, what's in the bucket around here that I can start learning from? And there is nothing. Ben Benjamin's up this way, but other than Ben Benjamin, there was nobody else really up in the area, at least that I was aware of. We didn't have the internet back then, so it's not like I could Google the next CE course.
Right. That's right.
We actually had to go read some publications to kind of look for this stuff. It was only then that I realized I had been so blessed for the last 5 or 6 years down in Florida to be able to just feed off of all this information coming through. And and that's what kind of, I think I met you first, maybe it was like 2000, 2001 at a course in Connecticut. It was the first live course that I did with you. And I remember being scared out of my mind to go to that class because I was going to go see Whitney Lowe. And it's true. It's just like, to me, it was like if somebody was going to go meet Derek Jeter. Like that was the way I felt about you. I still feel that way about you, but I'm just not as intimidated now. It was bad. But back then,
the real story now, right?
Well, it got better, to be honest. It was just one of those situations where I realized, you know what? It's really not about who's the smartest person in the room. It was really about an exchanging of ideas and having discussions and conversations. And I know, obviously, I learned a lot of my assessment and evaluation skills from you. But over the years, as your apprentice in the classroom and helping you as a teaching assistant, I learned how to communicate better with students and how important that aspect is. It's just, just because you know a lot about massage or know a lot about something doesn't mean you can obviously teach it. And I learned that pretty quickly because I was like, I can do this. And frankly, I couldn't until I started understanding what you were doing. And then, so I've been very fortunate throughout my career to be able to kind of piggyback off of some pretty high rollers out there.
Now, when did the Boston Bodyworker start? Your clinic that you put together, was that already in progress at that time in early 2000s? Or when did you get started with that?
So the vision was, when I left Florida, to come back up to Boston and bring what I did in Florida up into Boston. So I wanted to call the business the Boston Bodyworker. So I established the name before I moved back, and the tagline was bringing clinical massage to the masses, capital M, capital A. Masses. So that was my
clever.
Catchy little.
I'm gonna have to admit, though, I never caught that in the tagline, and I lived in Boston for a year, so I should know that, but I missed it. So that's clever.
Most people didn't, but and that's okay. It was just my little thing. But that's my vision at the time was, I just want to be able to do what I'm doing here for the people up there. So that's what I was technically doing. And so from there, I started in 99. It's a funny story, actually. I came back up here, like I said, I was going to work with the Celtics. And as I got up here, and went to the first meeting with them. It just fell through. It didn't work out. They were at a new facility and they had their in-house stuff. And anyway, it just fell through the cracks. So I wanted to look for another job, and I could not find a job doing massage anywhere. There were ads in the papers for massage therapists, and I would call them and they would say, "We're not accepting any more applications." And after a while, I realized I was being discriminated against because they really wanted female therapists. They didn't want massage therapists. They just want female massage therapists.
Right. Uh-huh.
So my parents would tell me that, you're not looking hard enough. So I had my sister-in-law call two of the ads just before we sat down to eat dinner. I said, "Why don't you call? Tell me you're a massage therapist and you're looking for work." And I said, "I guarantee you they'll call you in for an interview." And sure enough, both times she called, she got an interview both times. And I said, "That's what I'm dealing with."
Yeah.
And, and I don't know, and we'll get into this in a little bit, but I don't know where my mindset came from at the time, but I distinctly remember not being upset about it.
Yeah.
It was unfortunate, but it's like, listen, I picked the one field where men are the ones discriminated against.
Yeah.
And,
So
I'm not going to get into sympathy.
yeah, we hear a lot about this in our field, and I see as I look at social media posts and things like that, a lot of people let that get to them, and especially men who have had it very easy because they've never been in a situation like this where they were not the most first choice for those kinds of things. So it is interesting. So that was one of those early situations where you basically didn't let that stop you, and you said, like, this is some issue and I'm just going to have to figure out the workaround there, it sounds like.
Yeah, I knew the work that I wanted to do, and I knew that whether it was male or female or otherwise, that that person was just looking for a good pair of hands.
Yeah.
And I just had to do whatever I could to get my hands on them to build that level of trust.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
From there, if they didn't like me from there, that might be a whole other issue that I had to deal with.
Yeah.
But at least once I had the opportunity to prove myself, that's all I needed.
Yeah.
And I think that's, that goes a long way in life in general, but life is difficult sometimes,
Yeah, and so much of that, I think is about mindset. I mean, we had a wonderful conversation with Benny Vaughn a few months back, talking about his career. And, he has said this when people make that kind of complaint frequently. He said, look, I was a black man doing massage in the South in the 70s. And if I can have a successful practice, you can have a successful practice. And I think that's really true for so many
people. And I won't
people.
deny that. I mean, I've had Benny's videotapes, where he's at University of Florida with his bow tie on and he's doing his sports massage. And I've heard interviews and discussed him with you. And I think at the time it was probably along those lines that I thought, listen, somebody like Benny, who was put in the most adverse conditions that you could possibly be thrown into, and yet has not only success, but the attitude he has and just his personality, his character, everything about him. You're just like, well, this guy has fought harder battles than I'll ever fight.
Yeah.
So I can do it. I can easily do it. So so I started in 99 when I came up here and knew I wanted to do Boston Bodyworker. But when I didn't get the job at the Celtics, I had to go back to what I knew, which was bartending. And so there was an opportunity to be a bartender on the, I forget the name of the ship now, even though it's right outside my door. Spirit of Boston. It's a party ship, basically, that I was going to bartend. And my brother was like, don't go back to bartending. You'll never get out of it. You're going to get stuck in there for life. And I said, I got to pay rent, And I was walking out the door to go to my first shift. I had my monkey suit on and everything. And I got a call from this woman who says she owns a spinning studio in downtown Crossing, which is downtown Boston. And she was looking to rent a room in the back of her spin studio, and would I be interested? And I said, I'll be there tomorrow. And I called the Spirit of Boston and said, I'm not coming in. And that's when the Boston Bodyworker started.
Yeah.
And it was, it's just sometimes things happen like that.
Yeah. So in terms of do you think, I've pondered about this a great deal because in trying to teach massage therapists entrepreneurial skills or a business mindset, I mean, that's something that I have watched you do over the years with tremendous success and gumption, just, come up against things and find a way around those challenges. And it seems like a lot of people have difficulty getting past that sense of, oh, this is an obstacle, or this is something that's in my way, like I'm not going to be able to do this kind of thing? Like, how do you think that's just an inherent aspect of your personality, or is that trainable?
I think there's probably a smidge of both
Mhm.
and some other in there, but I think, first and foremost, I'm a Jew, so it's running through my veins that we survive, right?
Mhm.
It's in
Yeah.
our DNA that we are survivors. So I think that has a lot to do with it.
Yeah.
But on the flip side of that, I'm as stubborn as the day is long.
Mhm.
And you got to figure out where your motivation comes from. And mine, to be frank, came from my parents.
Yeah.
They pulled me aside when I first moved up here, didn't get the job with the Celtics. And after my sister-in-law was able to get interviews and I wasn't, they said, well, massage is a nice hobby. What are you going to do for a living?
Yeah.
And that offended me to no end
Mhm.
because this is what I'm doing for a living.
Yeah.
There was never a question of what am I going to do for the rest of my life? This was it. The only question was, how do I achieve that?
Mhm.
And that has been my driving force and still is my driving force to this day, because the last thing I ever want to do is to give my parents that feeling of like, see, we told you so.
Yeah.
And I had this conversation with my parents over the last 10, 15 years,
Yeah.
that they're kind of like, yeah, I think you're good at this point. But the first 5 to 7 years, that was it, because
Yeah.
I was not going to let anything deny me of that.
Yeah.
And then the other part of it is, Bryce, my friend Bryce died in '95, and I realized how fragile life can be.
Mhm.
It set my world upside down. To this day, it's still scarring. And I think that's another part of it. So I've been motivated to, my dream for Boston Bodyworker was, as Bryce and I talked about this back in the '90s, that we were going to start a clinic together and build a business together in Florida. Obviously, that didn't work out. I'm back here in Boston, but it's always been my dream to continue that promise that we had to each other.
Yeah.
So there are multiple factors that I think motivate us and keep us moving forward. I think you just need to figure out what those are and use them as your strength, not as weaknesses.
Yeah. So, you developed a very highly successful clinic there with a couple of different locations in Boston. And that was, I've watched that growth process over the years and just continued to be impressed by what you'd done there. I mean, having the location that you had right in downtown Boston at Copley Square, right, is where it was.
Mm-hmm. The
You know,
original was in downtown Crossing. Then I moved in 2001 to Copley
yeah,
Square, the finish line of
yes,
the marathon.
right. So that was just I think it was a great marker for massage too, to see that kind of clinic done in that location there with that degree of visibility. I think was just tremendously impressive. And I do remember too, you've had some serious challenges there in that location, in particular, for example, with the marathon bombing. I mean, you had to close your office for a while, right? Right downtown.
Yeah. So those that know Boston Bodyworker here, we're known around town as 26.3 because we're a tenth of a mile past the finish line of the Boston Marathon. And the marathon season here is kind of like, well, I was going to say it's like a championship parade here too, but anyway. Well, we won't be seeing any of those for a while. But anyway,
Yeah.
it's a rite of passage here. We skip school. We do different things. Kids growing up, kids come into the city to watch the marathon. It's just a great event. But we've been involved with the marathon since I came back up here in 99, 2000. And when the bombing hit, we were actually not inside of our space because on Marathon Monday you can't access our space as a guest because the streets are all blocked off. So we're not going to take clients that day. And if runners wanted to come in, they would have to walk basically 3/4 of a mile just to get back around to our doors. So we set up shop at a hotel, which was just across the street from us. And we did massages for different charity teams. I forget, maybe it was Boston Children's Hospital that year or something. So yeah, we weren't in the space at the time, but when that bomb went off, that shut us down immediately for 10, 12 days. And then from there, we had lost quite a few of our own members. Sorry.
Yeah.
We had lost a few members, and it hit pretty close to home. Pretty close to home, and it was scary.
Yeah.
So we had, as an owner, as a boss, you quickly recognize that this business is so much more than your vision, your dream.
Mm-hmm.
And there are people's lives involved here. And a lot of my therapists and everybody. So my initial thought, and again, this wasn't through training or time, it was just, what can I do for them? How can I help them?
Yeah.
Because that's the first thing you want to do. I think human nature is, and the first thing when a crisis happens, if it doesn't directly impact you in the moment, how can I help?
Mm-hmm.
How can I help? And that's what I really wanted to do at the time. And it just took us some time to reopen. So like I said, we were closed for 2 weeks, but it probably took us, I would say, close to a year and a half before we got back up. We were probably doing, before the marathon, about 250 massages a week.
Mm-hmm.
And it took us close to a year and a half to get back to around that.
Now that must have been, I can only assume, as the business owner, responsible for all of those practitioners and responsible to your clientele and everybody there. That must have just been tremendously scary when you were notified you can't open for a couple of weeks, and you're going to have to be closed, like all of a sudden, just with no warning whatsoever. I mean, how did you deal with that?
Yeah, my first reaction was, how am I going to pay my bills?
Yeah.
Because whether it's, what's the first rule they say about opening up a business is location, location, location.
Mm-hmm.
Well, back then they did. Now the internet, you can sit in your own house and do it, I guess. But
right.
So my location was prime real estate.
Mm-hmm.
And when you tell a business, any business, massage or a restaurant or anything in that sort of location, that they have to close for a week, 10 days, that's a lot of revenue lost. And it was scary. And it crippled us. It crippled us. And I think ultimately what it came down to was, I was determined to make this work out of spite. It was one of those things. My girls at the time, I have 2 daughters, and they were, 2013. So they were 5 and 8 at the time. And I didn't want them to see us spiral out into nothing. I wanted them to see that, from evil can come some good, but you just have to work for it. And we slowly just started building it up. And, God bless my wife. She has a steady job that she was able to support financially some of the decisions we had to make with the business, and, trust that I would be successful enough to pay us back, because we borrowed from her 401k, which is not a smart thing to do. Don't ever do that, please. But I did pay it back, and we did all the right things, but it was a huge risk. But I am so stubborn. She knew that there was no way that I was going to start, go back to bartending or something.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, I think it's one of those things where you just have to decide, how bad do you want it?
Yeah.
And what are you willing to do to stay after it? Because if it's something you're truly passionate about, like I am about massage, I can't imagine myself doing anything else.
Yeah.
And that thought is probably more scary than not succeeding.
Yeah. So for you, really, a lot of this comes out of, you didn't really even, sounds like, entertain much the idea that this wasn't going to be a workable solution. You just said, like, I've got to find a way to make this workable solution. And that's kind of what I hear from a lot of people who work with these kinds of struggles, and say, like, it's kind of like that. I think there was a scene in the Apollo 13 movie where they was, trying to figure out what to do. He just said, failure is not an option. That's kind of what you have to adopt, that sort of mindset of, like, I just have to find a way to make this work. Yeah.
See, and I think what I heard a lot back then was, especially from people in the massage community, was like, well, is your landlord going to give you a break? What are you going to do? And I've always had a good head on my shoulders, and understanding that ignorance of the law is not a defense.
Mm-hmm.
And you sign a contract with somebody, like a lease, or even it's a personal contract, you need to be accountable for that. You know? And so I reached out to my landlord. I spoke to my landlord, but I wasn't asking my landlord for forgiveness or anything. I just was asking, what can you do to help me, and how can I help you so we can do this? Because I'm not trying to bail, but I didn't want to file bankruptcy, and I didn't want to go through all those channels.
Yeah.
And they basically, we negotiated at that time. We negotiated to just I didn't pay rent for the first 3 months following the marathon, but agreed over the next 9 months to amortize those 3 months out. So, they were very nice to allow me to do that. And some people will say, I can't believe they still charge you. And and today COVID is the same thing. They're running a business just as I'm running a business. Just because they have an extra comma in their revenue line doesn't mean that
that's right.
they're any better off than I am.
Right. Yeah. Their income numbers may be higher, but so are their debt numbers of what the expenses are. So, yeah.
People who make over $70,000 a year, there's no comparative analysis of terms of happiness or success after 70,000. It's all relative to everything else.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So how is that's also now posed challenges for you, as with so many people who I have talked to and listened to and watched grapple with this. We talked about business, and you talked about the things that they tell you when you learn about business. And one of the things that I always remember reading and hearing about is, make an emergency contingency plan for the things that might disrupt your business of, major, a fire or disaster or whatever kinds of things. And I will have to admit that global pandemic never came on the radar screen for me at all. And I think for so many people, just not prepared for how this was going to impact us.
Yeah, so I think I moved into Copley in 2001 to start Boston Bodywork at that location. A month later, 9/11 hit. Mm-hmm. So yes, 9/11 hit. So from there, everything got shut down in Boston for just like a day or two because there was suspicion of terrorists staying at the hotel nearby.
Yeah.
And at the time, that's when I started learning about terrorist insurance, basically, that they started to offer for your business.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
So I was like, yeah, I want some of that. Mm-hmm. Okay. So when the marathon bombing hit, I was insured. Yeah. I had insurance and I prepared for that. And I think that's something I would tell people all the time is that don't think that you'll never need it.
Yeah.
Because when you need it, you're going to kick yourself for not having it. Yeah. So it's one of those expenses that I always factor in is my insurance expenses into things. It's first of all, I mean, obviously you don't have to have terrorism insurance necessarily, but you have to have your workers' comp insurance. You have to have all the other stuff. If you don't have those and you think it'll be fine, it won't be.
Yeah.
At some point where it'll bite you. So preparedness was a big thing for me there. It's just, it was a situation where I obviously shutting down for 10 days is different than shutting down for 10 months is where we're at right now.
Yes. No kidding.
You know? So the conversation I had back in 2013 with my landlord, and I'll say this, first of all, the landlord, their main office was in our building. Mm-hmm. Okay. So it just happened to be that they own multiple buildings around Boston, but they just happened to be in my building.
Yeah.
So in other words, they knew who we were personally. That helped. Many of the people who worked in that office came to our clinic for bodywork, and the owner of the company, his granddaughter was injured in the marathon. So there was a camaraderie there. There was an understanding there. It was not just a matter of everybody save yourself.
Yeah.
The community came together. So they were great at the time, like I said, but fast forward now, 7 years later, when this happens, I shut down March 13th, 2020. My rent there, full disclosure, was $13,000 a month to pay rent in the space that sits empty. And everyone's like, well, is your landlord going to make you pay rent? And I said, well, what, because his mortgage is being relieved? No, it's not happening. Like everyone's got bills. Yeah. So I called my landlord and we talked it out. And he basically, I said, why don't I would like to pay half rent until this ends. And then we'll do the same thing again. I'll amortize the other half over the period of my lease. And they were fine with that. Not a problem, because obviously you can't get blood from a stone. So if I started filing bankruptcy, they knew they weren't going to get anything from me. So I figured, let's just try to see where this goes and hang on as long as we can. And I think if I've learned anything over the years, it's that when a crisis occurs, the ability to take a few punches and just to kind of size up your opponent goes a long way in helping you succeed in the long, long term. Mm-hmm. Because if we immediately, and I saw it a lot, 10 months ago when all this stuff started to go down, and I've seen it over the last 10 months, people have been reacting to every little thing, whether it's a new guideline that gets sent out or it's anything else, they just react. And, you're constantly going to try to run a business that is reactive, and that's no way to live a life. Not that I'm saying that I've been perfect with it. That's what I used to do, but I've gotten better at it as I've faced more and more adversity, that I've realized if kicking and screaming would help, I will kick and scream louder than anybody, but
Right.
typically it never helps.
Yeah. Right.
So when this happened, everyone says, what are you going to do? I said, first of all, massage is not the priority on anyone's mind right now. So what I want to do and what I will do is of no consequence. I said, we're just going to have to wait and see how this all unfolds. So that was March of 2020. April, May, June, July, August, I'm still not open, shelling out all this money. I knew that I had money saved over the last couple of years that I could handle this, but I also knew that there was a line in the sand that I said, it's either bankruptcy or know what. So I called my landlord again and I said, we're not going to be able to reopen safely. There was too many obstacles or hurdles in the way to reopen safely in that space. It's a community building. The HVAC system wasn't right. Space, the rent alone, whatever it was. So, and I wasn't expecting them to give me a break in the rent. And even if they did give me a break in the rent, $6,500 a month I couldn't afford, let alone 13. So I said to them, what can we do? Because I had just re-upped. I had a 10-year lease there, and I just re-upped for another 5 the previous year. So I still had, 3 years remaining on my lease. Yeah. That, like I said, I'm accountable for that. That's my problem, not theirs. So, and security deposits are there and all that stuff, and I know they can go after all that stuff. I wanted to figure it out, and we basically they were nice enough to negotiate down my lease if I made one payment to get out the remainder of the lease. So they let me out. It stings, but my thought was, if I can borrow this money, and I have my Seaport location where I'm at now, much smaller, much lower overhead, there's a chance I could do this. So that was my thinking at the time. But moreover, my thinking was, no matter what happens with Boston Bodywork or massage therapy or whatever it is, I know I'm going to be okay. I know that I've always been a survivor in that regard, that, if I have to go back to flipping burgers and waiting tables, I'll be okay. I really, really will be. I was really more concerned about my employees, and I really didn't want to see I'll brag about my staff till the end of the days, but this particular staff at the time that this all happened was probably my best staff that I've ever had. And we were primed and ready to do some really great things. And I didn't want to not only lose them for Boston Bodyworker, I didn't want to lose them for the profession, because every single one of them works hard at being a great massage therapist. And that's the kind of stuff that once you have somebody like that working with you, that's gold.
It is, and it is unfortunate that it is not as frequent, I think, as we certainly need it to be. It seems like there's been a lot more challenges finding those really dedicated, quality individuals that are out there nowadays. So, that's a loss. That's a hard one.
So, so when this all went down, I had, I've been having Zoom calls with my staff, not as frequently as I did at the beginning, but we would sit down, and I understood that anything that I say, anything that I do, any actions that I take are going to be reflective upon them. And I want to make sure that if they see me freaking out, they're going to freak out. So my immediate reaction was, don't worry about it. I'm still going to cover your insurance right now, your Aflacs. And I think I sent them out some of your videos, and I connect them. If you guys want to take Whitney's courses, we'll connect you with Whitney's courses. Whatever you guys can do to stay fresh and stay hungry, we'll get through this as a team, and we'll see what happens. Now, here we are 10 months later. Back open here. I have staff in here now, and it's just, I'm very fortunate to have my top staff coming back in right now to start representing what Boston Bodyworker can do for this part of the city, because we are reinventing ourselves over this part. The Seaport is a brand new area in Boston, even though Boston's a pimple of a city compared to New York. If you go from Copley to Seaport, it's probably a mile and a half. Okay. But people will not come here from there. They just won't. So it was one of those, we have to kind of reestablish ourselves here and start all over again. But I felt we could do it with a few different stipulations. Primarily, I negotiated free parking for my people here, for everybody here, employees
Mm-hmm.
and for my guests. And the building itself, beyond being a very green building, they just they put into HVAC UV lighting for the
Mm-hmm.
HVAC system. So I felt that even the air coming through the building in a close contact kind of room for more than 20 minutes was going to be safer, not
Yeah.
completely safe, obviously, but safer than it could possibly be. Air
Mm-hmm.
filtrations, the other. So I felt there were ways that we could deliver a service that the employees felt comfortable working in, guests felt comfortable coming to the space in. We're inside of a gym inside of this hotel. It's a pretty big gym, but the gym is not reopening.
Mm-hmm.
So we have basically 35,000 square feet of space and 3 treatment rooms.
Yeah.
So there's plenty of spacing in here,
Yeah.
That helps. That helps.
Yeah.
You walk around the rest of the hotel, I feel like I'm in The Shining because there's
Mm-hmm.
nobody. The hotel has been closed
Right.
now for a long time.
Wow. Uh-huh.
Yeah, but I don't know. It just the way I see it, and not because I'm in the seaport, but it's a fact. We're afloat.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not drowning. And when I'm not sailing away,
Yeah.
we're just afloat and we're just kind of treading water here. And I
Mhm.
think if we can ride this out, there's tremendous opportunity moving forward, not only for my business, but for massage businesses in general. But
Yeah.
that's easier said than done. A lot of other
Yeah.
therapists in my position, a lot of them are sole proprietors. They were living paycheck to paycheck, and it's just not as simple as that. So I'm not trying to say everybody can do it.
Yeah.
It's just I consider myself fortunate. And again, my wife still has a job. My kids are now 13 and 16, so they don't depend upon me for every little thing like they did back in the marathon times.
Mm-hmm.
So my wife and I joke about it. If this happened in 2010, just 10 years earlier, the kids would have been much younger, 8 and 5 or so, right? And 2010. To back up, we talk about adversity. 2010 was a time, or 2009 was really the time where I decided I can't have contractors anymore. I have to have employees. If I don't have employees, there's no way I can build this brand to get bigger. Nobody will do what I'm asking them to do if they think they're just contractors. So when I did that in 2010, I had some great staff who were looking forward to it, and they decided they didn't want to be employees, they want to be contractors, and they all left. Mm-hmm. Literally, like 5 of my 7 therapists walked out at the same time.
Wow.
So I was like, what do I do now? And the reality was, got to just keep swimming.
Yeah.
So I had to rehire and bring it all back. And the problem with that was that as I brought in new employees, these same contractors that left because they didn't want to become employees opened up a shop next door to me and stole my client list. And then sued me for being misclassified as a contractor instead of as an employee.
Oh my gosh.
So I had 4 different lawsuits that were going on over the next 3 years to deal with all that.
Yeah.
So I'm shelling out money as I'm already down money.
Yeah.
So when you take that and then I get through all that over the 3 years, and we get through it and we say, okay, we made it. I survived. Mm-hmm. And then the marathon bombing. I'm like,
right.
What do they say? What doesn't kill you makes you stronger?
I know. Yeah. So you're getting pretty strong. You're getting strong indeed.
It's one of those things you just got to go with it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, my sort of wish and dream is there, I've watched, I've known all of these stories because, you and I have talked about them throughout time. And I have marveled at your ability to weather each one of these storms and to come out still moving forward with this. And I just, I want to know and wish if you have any ideas of how this becomes trainable to train that mindset with people and that devotion to an end goal to be able to make those things work and push through no matter what the adversity that you encounter. Any ideas that you have about how to make that more prevalent in our world?
There's probably some famous quote, fail twice, get up 3 times. Whatever. I don't know. I don't buy into all the quotes necessarily, but it's, but it's one of the, I've always lived off the saying since I was a kid that's, anything worth having is worth working for. And I knew what I wanted. And you pair that with stubbornness or determination, depends how you want to look at it, it's almost impossible to fail. So there are obstacles that will always get in your way, but if there's something you really want and you really think that you deserve it, you're good at it, you will make a difference if you achieve it, then you'll find a way to do it. And that might mean, like nowadays, maybe driving for Uber when you're not doing massages. Whatever it might be that you need to make that money, there's always a revenue stream for you. The question is, are you willing to make those kind of sacrifices? And I've always been willing to do the free massages. I've always been willing to set up the chair in places where I'm not going to make any money. I'm just going to be handing out cards, because that sort of exposure and that sort of discipline over time is cumulative. And I don't know if you can necessarily teach that, though. And my parents probably had something to do with that. Part of the country I grew up in had something to do with that. Like I said, DNA might have something. I don't know if it's teachable. I think ultimately the question somebody needs to ask themselves in any career is this your passion? Because if it's your passion, there's no way anything's going to get in your way, because doing anything else in life would feel like a void.
Yeah.
So that's always been my thought.
Yeah, I really think it's so beneficial when people can tap into that, because there are a lot of obstacles that we do encounter in this field that are not typical in many other things. There's physical demands, there's the professional self-esteem issues, there's all kinds of things that are more challenging for us than there might be in certain other types of situations. And I see so many people just kind of give up by the wayside and say, like, yeah, I don't want to have to deal with this kind of thing. And it's like, well, probably that driving passion for this is not there. But then there are those other people that you see. I watch so many people, like watching their stories on social media or discussing this with those people who've had such tremendous adversity, and had situations like yours where they said, I can't, I've got a clinic, I can't keep it open right now, but I'm not stopping either. I'm going to find a way to work through this temporary period and then come out stronger on the other side. And that's just so inspiring to see people dedicated to those, to this field in that way, because I think, God, the world needs it. The world really does need the things that we do.
Yeah, and knowing what you want to do is only half the battle. You still have to do it.
Yeah,
that's the hard part of work, I guess, right?
Yeah.
So you can have the mindset, I think, to say, this is what I want, this is what I'm going to do, and this is what's going to happen when I do it.
Yeah.
Great, fantastic. Now you have to execute.
Exactly. Yeah, there's that. I think I was saying that you can do whatever you want to, but you may have to work for it.
Right.
And that sort of thing. Yeah.
And it's so true that you have. It's just if you think you understand how hard the work is going to be, then you're in trouble. You are really in trouble, because I think a lot of people would be like, no, I get it. I know I need to do the work. I said, if you knew what you're about to have to do to accomplish what you want to accomplish, you'd probably say, screw it, I'm not doing it. But if you really want to do it, don't think about what you think you're going to be doing, because you probably only do a third of that.
Yeah.
Because other obstacles will get in your way that you don't even know about or consider until they happen. And you're in the thick of it. And then you're going to think, well, I already started it.
Yeah, right.
Not now. So you just really need to just trust that if it's what your passion is, come hell or high water, you're going to make it there. You just don't know what's going to happen along that journey.
Right. Yeah.
Prepare what you can, but
yeah. And that is part of what makes the journey so interesting, I think, for all of us too, sometimes.
What's the old saying, life is a cruel teacher. She gives you the test first and the lessons come later. Yeah.
Well, I like that.
That's the truth,
Right.
And I've had enough. Like, here's a good example, sidebar story. March 2020 is when we hit COVID. So March 13th, we shut down our office, right? My wife's 21st birthday was on March 2nd. Okay. She's young at heart. And I decided I wanted to take her to celebrate her very special 21st birthday, take her away for a long weekend. So we went to Bermuda. And for the listeners, it wasn't her 21st. So we took her to Bermuda. The week before we went off to Bermuda, I had to have my third surgery for my elbow. Okay. You recall that I broke my hand. I broke my hand back in 2015, had multiple failed surgeries. So now I haven't been working in the massage room since 2015. So that's like taking a fish out of water.
Yeah.
I was on what I think was empathy fatigue and empathy withdrawals.
Uh-huh.
Like I wanted to be in that room so badly, but I couldn't. The pain in my elbow from everything that was going on was so bad. But finally we figured out what happened with my elbow, and I had the surgery the week before we went away. And I left surgery the next day. I didn't feel anything. It was the first time I hadn't felt anything in my elbow in 3.5 years.
Mm-hmm.
And I was so excited that I'm going to get back in the treatment room again. I'm going to start working on people again. And then we went on a vacation, and I was motivated to come back from vacation and do this. And then COVID hits.
Yeah.
And I haven't done a massage until just before this call started. I worked on salon for about 35 minutes.
Uh-huh.
It was awesome.
Yeah.
It was awesome.
Yeah.
And it's one of those things, like, again, it's my passion, but I've been able to teach it. I've been able to work with students. I've been able to do that stuff over the last 3 years, but I have not been able to be in a room and help somebody else to feel better.
Yeah.
And to me, that was hard.
Yeah. And I think there's also some value in that of periodically, when we do have that opportunity to step out of those things for a little while, it does remind us of why we do the things that we do and why we go through the challenges that we go through, because there is such tremendous reward in being able to be there for people and helping them in the way that we do with what we do in the treatment room.
Both for them and for you too. You know, I mean, there's no better feeling than serving others, right? I mean, that's, service is what we're born to do. So when we get to do that for a living, it's and I know for a fact, because my wife doesn't mince words, I've been quite the asshole to be around when I was going through this elbow stuff, because I wasn't able to have that outlet and understand, other people's issues. Everything was my issue. Yeah. And you don't get what I'm going through with running this business and the elbow pain that I have and everything else. But now that I'm like got a even more perspective on things, I can really appreciate the journey that I've taken just to get to here. So that's why I'm at this point, when this stuff happened with COVID, and as I've finished with the shut down Boston Bodywork or Copley location after 21 years in October, everyone was like very, very nice on social media. They were very inspiring and helpful and supportive. But that was my first baby. Yeah. And I said to my kids, we sat down and I said, listen, here's the deal. I said, we have to shut down Boston Bodywork or Copley. I said, but we're not going out of business. Mm-hmm. I said, I don't know if my business is going to survive this. I said, but right now, all we can do is focus on moving forward. I said, doesn't mean we shouldn't reflect on what was. I said, we don't have time to do that right now. I said, so come, spring of 2021, if the business isn't working, we will give Copley the honor and reflection it deserves. But right now, I can't focus on that. I need to focus on the future of Boston Bodyworker. And that has been kind of my mindset moving forward. It's not that I ignore how hard it's been. I mean, I have a storage locker down from my house that I pay $500 a month for, just to store 21 years of stuff. And I got like 8 massage tables in there. I got couches and chairs, and like that's what Boston Bodyworker has come down to, is just that room. And to see that as I do, it's gut wrenching. But I also know there's greater things to come, and this is just a blip in the big radar of things, Yeah.
Well, thank you very much for delving into these things with us, because I do think your story is very inspiring, and it really does help a lot of people. It always helps to know that there are other people grappling with similar types of adversity and challenges. But the big thing that I really hope everyone can take away is just understanding and seeing that passion that you have for doing something that means so much to you, and finding a way to say, hey, we're going to make this work. We're going to find a way to make it work. So you do continue to be an inspiration to a lot of practitioners out there. And I look forward to seeing more great things coming out of your endeavors in the years to come here.
I hope so. Yeah. I hope so. Yeah. From your mouth to God's ears, as my mom used to say. It's just,
right.
It's one of those things that let me say this though. I know people like you very well that have been doing this for longer than I have and faced your own adversities. And I travel on the road with the taping stuff. I see other people at conferences like Eric and James and whether it's Don Nelson or anybody that's out there that's been doing it longer than I have. And my stories might be my stories, but they're certainly not unique. We've all faced adversity in our own ways in our own lives. And that's when I know that I can do this because it's been done. And if you surround yourself with those sort of people that have that mindset that this is my passion, this is what we want to do, so let's just figure out a better way to do it. If we have to do it differently, let's do it. But you don't stop moving forward just because you hit what's the other thing? The obstacle is the way. That's the Stoics' approach to it. And that is the only way out is through. You got to go through it.
Yeah. Yeah. Yep. Wise words indeed there. So Drew, how can people find out more about you and Boston Bodyworker?
I hope your listeners will reach out to me. I'm happy to provide them with any assistance I can to make this next chapter of their career a successful one. So go to learn2tape.com. That's learn with the number 2 tape.com or bostonbodyworker.com to learn more about me. Or just you can email me at drew@learn2tape.com or drew@bostonbodyworker.com.
Well, thank you all for joining us today on the Thinking Practitioner Podcast. And we would like to also thank ABMP, who is a proud sponsor of the Thinking Practitioner. All massage therapists and body workers can access free ABMP resources and information on the coronavirus and massage profession at abmp.com/COVID-19. That includes sample release forms, PPE guides, and a special issue of Massage and Bodywork magazine, where Till and I are frequent contributors. For more, check out the ABMP podcast, available at abmp.com/podcasts or wherever you prefer to listen. Till will be back with me in the next episode. We've been doing some solo episodes here. We were on different sort of breaks and hiatuses for things that we were trying to take care of outside of work. He and I will be back together next go round, and we would like to again thank our sponsors for the show. And if you want to get some additional information, please feel free to stop by our sites for show notes, transcripts, and any extras. You can find that over on my site at the academyofclinicalmassage.com and over on Till's site at advanced-trainings.com. So any questions or things you'd like to hear us talk about, please do email us at info@thethinkingpractitioner.com or look for us on social media as well. And as always, please do follow us on Spotify, rate us on Apple Podcasts, or wherever you happen to listen to your podcasts, and do tell a friend. Thanks again, Drew, so much for being with me today. And thank you all for listening, and we will see you again in a couple weeks.